You know what's wild? Right now, at this exact moment, there are animals voluntarily living inside your house. Cats, dogs, rabbits, birds, creatures that could theoretically scratch you, bite you, or just leave and never come back. And yet they stay. They trust you. Which brings up one of the most bizarre questions in all of evolutionary history. How did animals ever learn to trust humans in the first place? Because here's the thing. For most of human history, we were the predators. Humans hunted animals. We killed them for food, for fur, for protection. We were, objectively, one of the scariest things that could happen to a wild animal. So at some point, some animals decided to ignore every survival instinct screaming at them and just trust us anyway. And that decision basically shaped the entire modern world. Let's start with the most obvious example, dogs. Except the story isn't actually about dogs at all. It's about wolves, and it's way weirder than you probably think. Around 15 to 40,000 years ago, we're still not entirely sure on the exact timeline, some wolves started hanging around human campsites. And I know what you're thinking. That seems dangerous. Those are wolves. But here's the thing about wolves. They're actually incredibly flexible about food. They'll eat almost anything. So when they realized that human hunting camps left behind scraps, bones, partially eaten kills that humans didn't want, suddenly your campsite became a free all-you-can-eat buffet. But here's where it gets interesting. Most wolves would grab the food and leave. But some wolves had a specific genetic trait. They had what we might call a lower fear response. They weren't as spooked by humans. They could tolerate being closer to us while we were just hanging out. Not friendly, not domesticated yet, just less terrified. And those wolves? They ate better. They got more food. They survived longer. They had more puppies. Those puppies inherited the same low-fear genetics. Over generations, you start getting wolves that are genuinely comfortable around humans. Not because they were trained, not because we bred them for it deliberately. Just because the less scared wolves got fed better, and natural selection did the rest. That's the first big piece of the puzzle. Some animals are just naturally less afraid of us than others. And that matters because fear is the biggest obstacle to trust. An animal can't learn to trust something it's too petrified to approach in the first place. But there's a second part to this story, and it's where humans actually started doing something deliberate. Around the time these proto-dogs were hanging around, someone realized something. These less fearful wolves could be useful. They could eat scraps that would otherwise go to waste. They could warn you if dangerous predators were approaching. They could help you hunt by running down prey that you could then kill. And here's the kicker. They were willing to do all of this in exchange for food. That's a deal. That's a transaction. And once you understand it that way, trust isn't really about the animal being kind or loving anymore. It's about predictability. The wolf learns that if it hangs around the human and doesn't attack, it gets fed. The human learns that the wolf, in exchange for food, provides value. Both sides benefit. Both sides repeat the behavior. That's genuinely how trust starts. Not with love, not with friendship, just with consistent mutual benefit over a long period of time. And this exact same pattern happens again and again throughout history. Cats, which we usually think of as being self-domesticated, actually followed almost the exact same pattern. Around 10,000 years ago, humans started farming grain. Grain attracts rodents. Rodents attract wildcats. Cats realized that human settlements were absolutely packed with the one thing they wanted most: easy prey. And because they hunted rodents instead of being a threat to humans directly, we basically tolerated them. Then we started providing additional benefits like shelter and scraps. Same transaction, different species. Now here's where it gets weird. Some animals learned to trust us not because we were beneficial, but because we were predictable and they were desperate. Take horses. Horses are herd animals, and herd animals have a specific psychological need. They need to be around other members of their herd, or they get stressed. That's not a weakness. That's just how they evolved. Horses didn't domesticate because we convinced them we were better than their herd. They domesticated because we became their herd. We filled a psychological role that they needed filled, which means that some animals didn't learn to trust us because they figured out we were helpful. They learned to trust us because we became part of their social structure. We became family in a very literal evolutionary sense. Their brain chemistry was wired to seek out group membership, and we provided it. But here's the final piece, and it might be the most important one. Some animals learned to trust us not because anything we did was particularly smart or strategic, but because they literally couldn't survive without us anymore. Cows weren't domesticated because they thought humans were cool. They were domesticated because we took over their entire evolutionary niche. We controlled the grasslands they ate. We controlled their breeding. We controlled their shelter. After a few generations, a wild cow doesn't even know how to survive without humans. It's not that the cow trusts us because it made a rational choice, it's that the cow has no alternative. That sounds dark, and in some ways it is, but it also explains something we see across dozens of species. Animals that are fully domesticated often look genuinely different from their wild ancestors. They have floppy ears, different coloring, shorter snouts, behavioral changes. And a lot of this happens shockingly fast, sometimes within just a few generations, because once the animal is dependent on you for survival, the selective pressure changes entirely. When a wild animal is trying to survive in nature, natural selection favors the traits that make it most dangerous and independent. But when an animal is dependent on a human for food and shelter, natural selection starts favoring the traits that make it most useful or least threatening to its keeper. And if you've got a population of animals that are all trapped in that system, you're basically rewriting their entire evolutionary history. So, to actually answer the question, how did animals learn to trust humans? The answer is probably less romantic than you'd hope. Some animals were born less afraid. Some animals needed what we offered. Some animals had no other choice. And across all of them, it came down to consistent, predictable interaction over generations. Trust wasn't something we earned. It was something that emerged naturally when two species had enough repeated positive interactions that it became evolutionarily advantageous to stop fleeing and start cooperating. Which is wild if you think about it, because it means the animals that live with us right now aren't there because they love us. They're there because their ancestors made a deal with our ancestors a really, really long time ago, and both sides have been honoring that deal ever since.